Thomas, thank you for taking the time to come in today.
Yeah.
I know it's a big week for Cisco right now, but I thought we'd kick things off today by talking to the audience a little bit more about your role at AppDynamics and a little bit more about what the past 5 months have been like since Cisco made the announcement back in January that they'd be acquiring AppDynamics.
Sure. So just a little background about me. So I came from the Cisco side. I've been a general manager of multiple businesses, from startups to multi-billion-dollar divisions of Cisco. But over the last year or so, I've been really focusing on how do we drive Cisco's relevance in the world of IT operational analytics. And as part of that, I was the business sponsor for the AppDynamics acquisition, and now I'm part of AppDynamics. So it's been great to actually straddle both sides of both entities. And Cisco's been really excited about the opportunity to bring together AppDynamics. And it is a funny story. You read about it in the press. It sounds like, hey, 3 days, 72 hours, and all of a sudden, right before an IPO, Cisco acquires AppDynamics. And the story, although sounds dramatic, there was actually a lot of thinking in terms of our partnership actually long before we decided to acquire AppDynamics. And largely it's because of the story you just heard from Bill. We heard so many of our customers that saw the power of what application intelligence can provide them. And then, of course, Cisco having the footprint of understanding what's going on in the infrastructure layers, we thought that that partnership made a lot of sense in terms of how we got together.
Awesome. So, what was it originally that caught Cisco's eye about AppDynamics? Because from my understanding is that, like you said, it wasn't so much the 72-hour build-up transaction, late on January 24th. It started earlier than that, but take us back a little bit further, and what was it specifically that really got Cisco interested in what AppDynamics was doing?
Sure, there's a number of things. The first thing is that we had been a customer of AppDynamics within Cisco IT for many years. Most of our mission-critical applications had been instrumented, and we were seeing the benefits ourselves. At the same time, being in enough customer conversations talking about data center or networking or security or some of these other technologies, a lot of our customers were saying, hey, Cisco, it's great that you can provide us visibility in that layer, but really it's all about the app, and it's about the business transaction that's occurring within the app. That's ultimately what I care about. So we need to understand what's happening. I'll give you an analogy. So literally this weekend, I live in the Bay Area. It was 100 degrees, San Francisco Bay Area this weekend, and first time I had turned on my air conditioner in a while, right? And I come in from the outside and I notice that there's a leak from my ceiling, all this big puddle of water on my kitchen floor. So immediately you see a leak, who do you call? Well, you think the plumber, right? So I call the plumber. Plumber comes out and says, no. And guess what? It's the air conditioning guy. You got to call the air conditioner, right? So that's the way a lot of our IT customers feel. CIOs, IT operations leaders, they're just tired of trying to figure out who to call, when to call, whose fault it is. And so a lot of it is about trying to bring together the intelligence you need from the application all the way down into the network to better troubleshoot much faster and get much more predictive. And so when we looked at AppDynamics, from being a customer, from being well recognized in the industry as a thought leader and as a product innovation leader, as well as the technology itself, the product is fantastic. But one of the things that people probably didn't recognize was how valuable the data that AppDynamics has is. When you're deployed at the world's largest enterprises, people like United, and you see what's going on from an application and business performing lens, that data is incredible, and it's very valuable, particularly in the world of machine learning, AI, and automation. And so while Cisco has enormous amount of data on what's going on in the network, it's important that we understand how we can put business context around that and provide a much better holistic point of view through kind of the combination of AppDynamics plus Cisco.
That's great. So the technology is certainly important, but earlier today when you and I talked, we talked about the importance of organizational change and culture. And Mike Shanko at Silicon Valley Bank, as well as Adam Jacob, we heard earlier from Chef, really stressing the importance of culture within organizations. And I was hoping you could share with us and the audience a little bit more about what's it been like to kind of merge the culture of AppDynamics with Cisco, and specifically, how do you foresee the Cisco sales force and the greater partner ecosystem, going from selling what has been traditionally infrastructure-based solutions to now the value of your software platform?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the way I would think about it is, firstly, let's just unpack the cultural part of it. Cisco has done well over 200 acquisitions over the course of its lifetime. Some very big, like AppDynamics, some very small. I've personally been involved with a number of them, and I can tell you what works and what doesn't work and all the war stories. Not everyone is a little bit different, but there's certain models for businesses like AppDynamics that we've used in the past when we've integrated technologies. An example recently that some people in the room might know is when we acquired the leader in cloud networking, which is a company called Meraki, right? And that's been an enormously successful acquisition. We bought them. They were doing about 100 million in revenue. This year they'll do 1.4 billion 4 years later. So being able to scale. And one of the things that we learned from that was the importance of autonomy and making sure that if you have a rocket ship like AppDynamics that's growing really well in a market that's very hot, the last thing we want to do is Cisco kind of trying to help too much and surround it too much and actually slow it down. So in many ways, my role actually now is trying to optimize what parts of the Cisco machine can really help accelerate AppDynamics, and which parts of it should we just kind of keep away and not try to integrate right away. And so the first obvious place you look is, well, how can we try to mobilize our sales teams to cover more ground? AppDynamics has built an amazingly successful business on the verge of going public on its own, given a very strong sales team. But there's a very limited capability when you think about all of the global, taking that business globally, you're thinking about partners and how Cisco could potentially open up AppDynamics to a much larger set of partners, both technology partners as well as go-to-market partners. And then there's the notion of we've got so many salespeople that have relationships at Cisco with senior executives in almost every enterprise account. And so for AppDynamics, that's a real door opener so that we can open the door with warm relationships and help AppDynamics come in and, if they're not already penetrated, have the ability to have a high-level conversation with those prospective buyers. But it actually goes both ways. Because on one hand, I think Cisco can help AppDynamics, but on the other hand, AppDynamics can help Cisco a lot. A lot of people comment about, well, gee, you paid a lot of money for AppDynamics, and that's true. But the reason being is we weren't looking at it specifically as just an APM product. We were looking at it as a foundational layer of what really one of the next big software businesses can be at Cisco. And as part of that, there's a lot about what AppDynamics does in terms of its business model, in terms of its sales motion, the way it can sell software very effectively, and being able to bring that DNA back into Cisco, almost as a two-way kind of interstate highway, if you will, of information flowing through them. I think that's the way to think about it. We're going to learn together as we go, but we're trying to figure out how to accelerate that DNA from both sides to truly make both things better.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the example of Meraki. You think about acquisitions that have worked, ones that have not, kind of that spin in, spin out theory. And if you kind of look at the investment thesis of Cisco, I'd say over the past 5 years or so, there's a recurring theme of it's data center, it's cloud, it's IoT, security, big data, and it's also going to be core networking.
Yes.
And so could you make the case that the acquisition of AppDynamics and the valuation that you were willing to assign to that organization when you made the transaction was worth it because that platform covers kind of all 6 of those core investment areas for Cisco?
Absolutely. I mean, the way we think about it is, first of all, AppDynamics as a foundational business for what we think is a multi-billion-dollar software franchise over time. And that on its own is worth doing the acquisition. But that being said, the product synergies that we have between what we can do with AppD in combination with things like you said, our data center business is very natural, and we can maybe talk a little bit about some of those product integrations in a minute. Or we talk about IoT as another example. Cisco's made big investments in IoT. In fact, we bought another company to be the foundation of that business called Jasper, and we sell ruggedized routers and sensors and things that bring IoT together. AppDynamics has an IoT monitoring system, right? That can very much take advantage of that. I think there's a huge opportunity in security in terms of how we can help with things like application security. So In general, we're looking at, anytime we do an acquisition, we absolutely look at the synergies across the portfolio. But at the same time, we are laser focused around not trying to do too many integrations at once, because we don't want to distract AppD from its core mission, which is building the best possible application intelligence product that there is in the market.
So you brought up Tetration, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. A lot of buzz right now around what AppDynamics is going to be doing with Tetration. But beyond that, it's where do you see some of the future synergies of other products and services that are going to integrate with the AppDynamics platform?
Sure. So firstly, I'd say is, the way we're looking at AppDynamics is that there's a number of Cisco product integrations that we absolutely have to tackle, and I'll get to those in a second. But don't think for a minute that we're not going to integrate AppDynamics with non-Cisco partners as well. We've got great partnerships with ServiceNow, AWS, Splunk, a number of others. We're going to continue to invest in those. At the same time, if you think about it from the Cisco lens, and if a customer is looking at putting together a private or a multi-cloud solution, Cisco offers a whole different set of data center products that specialize in compute, switching, data center switching, cloud management, as well as analytics, and Tetration being the analytics component. Each of those products actually have a synergy path with AppDynamics. In fact, in many ways, we're looking to bundle some of those capabilities together. So, if you buy a private cloud effectively powered by Cisco, you're going to have your application instrumentation kind of built in as part of that offering to make it easier for our customers to digest some of that. Tetration is another example. It's really designed for looking at how application segmentation is done across the data center, and specifically how you enforce security parameters around the data center. That's providing AppD, giving Tetration some business context in terms of what application flows are actually happening, and how those business transactions impact end users, and how the data center needs to reprovision itself based on the impact of users. We think that's a natural place to integrate. But we also think things like networking. Cisco last week, or just, and you'll hear more about it next week as well at our Cisco Live event, just introduced a whole new architecture for core networking, and how it's becoming much more automated, leveraging telemetry and machine learning. That's a massive set of data that we can use to orchestrate better intelligence and enrich the flow maps of AppD to provide much deeper visibility in what's happening in the network. So, whether it's network, security, data center, there's a number of opportunities, but frankly, we're just trying to stay really focused on what do we think is going to move the needle, what do we think has the most common buying center care-abouts, and then focusing on aligning our sales teams between the two groups to go after that opportunity.
So if we're focusing on the platform, in April, the developers toolkit was announced in terms of really giving the end user real-time visibility into application performance data, and delivering what they consider business outcomes.
Right.
And I think that's a term that it's often used.
Overused?
I think it's overused a little bit, and I think
agree.
in the wrong context sometimes.
I agree.
So, but I was hoping, from your perspective, what are some business outcomes that you see, the developers toolkit, being applied to, and obviously how could our end users in the audience potentially use it?
Yeah, listen, I think Bill summarized a great set of examples for us on how United is being able to drive better on-time arrivals, the ability to understand what's happening across their revenue systems at any point in time, looking at user engagement across an application, conversion rates of trying to get people from one part of the funnel to another part of the funnel. These are all examples. What's unique about AppDynamics is that it's been able to instrument applications through the lens of a business transaction itself. So it's not just looking at what's going on inside of the runtime of an app. It's actually being able to put business context around that and stitching different transactions together that basically create a user journey. So in that point, you can decide as a customer, hey, I have a certain set of health metrics that are important to my business, whether it's revenue or engagement on a website or some other type of conversion rate. Being able to map and surface those health metrics in real time through your APM instrumentation is something that's unique in the industry. And so when we talk about business outcomes, we're really talking about we can truly take it to the health metrics of your business through your IT environment, which we think is interesting.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Bill. That's something that to be honest, we at Ahead, we talk a lot about it, and it's not so much as, it's not all about the technology, it's the real life stories that we hear from end users about the power of the platform, how it's changed their business, and what Bill talked about earlier in terms of it giving real-time visibility into areas that used to take teams, like full teams, sometimes days, if not maybe a week, to diagnose, identify, and then resolve, down to minutes, sometimes seconds, which is very powerful. But if we're sitting here 3 years from now and we're having the same conversation, what are some of the future benefits of the platform that you're working on now that you can share with the audience that you think are going to create the next wave of great customer success stories?
Yeah, I think we're just scratching the surface of what we can do around automation and self-healing. I know that's been one of those things that have been talked about for many years, but it's actually becoming more possible now. So today, I think the first step is you really have to have a good set of coverage. You have to be able to monitor enough things so that in real time, so that you can use that data, leverage machine learning capability to find anomalies, to predict things that'll happen before they happen, and then surface those insights into automation tools that allows you to reorchestrate and make changes across your IT environment. If you can do that, you're effectively creating a self-healing system of intelligence, if you will. A great example, trying to put this back in the context of something, in the consumer world, Tesla has done a great example of what they've done. As if you're a Tesla driver, you know that you're basically, Tesla is a software company that happens to sell cars versus the other way around. And it was interesting, I'll just give you an example. The other day I take my daughter to work, and there's this really bumpy road right across where her school is. And as Tesla, for those of you who know, they do over-the-air updates to their software on a regular basis. And as part of that, they're collecting massive telemetry from the fleet of cars, reprogramming their software based on what other Teslas have seen on the roads, and then makes your experience better. So literally, I'm sitting there driving down the road, and I noticed that the suspension of the car rose during a part right before we got to that bumpy spot, and the Tesla told me it was going to rise, and then it went back down. And so that's the concept of looking at telemetry, using data at a very mass scale of having a lot of data points, leveraging machine learning, and then providing that automation to fix the car so that the next time it doesn't have that problem. I think from a Cisco point of view, you could do the same thing with our fleet of infrastructure, whether it's switches, network devices, security endpoints, or any application. Being able to build a system of intelligence by collecting data from all sites in real time and allow that instrumentation to happen is a key value add. And we think we can do that together with some of our key partners as well as with the Cisco assets that we have in place today.
Right. Well, we don't have much time left, but I think the one question that the audience really wants to know is, are the Warriors going to repeat?
I would say, well, this is a tough place to maybe have that conversation, but being in the Midwest. But I think most people would say yes. I think Vegas has bet yes, and it was heartbreaking last year when we were there in Game 7 and saw it slip away. So we're glad we picked it up this year.
Awesome.
But anyway.
Great. Well, this has been great. Hopefully the audience enjoyed it. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Michael.
All right, you bet.
Yeah, cheers.
Yeah, you bet.